Awaken Beauties, finally, it's here. The truth to empower women to true inner beauty through a healthy mind and inner biology. I am your hostess, Cassandra Keogh, a 20-year salon owner, organic beauty product formulator, positive mind management, and clinical hypnotherapist. And I am here to help you stay sane, get sleep, and bring your sexy back. Sponsored by evoquebeauty.com. evoquebeauty.com. Now, let's get to it. Welcome to the Awaken Beauty podcast. This is Cassandra, your clinical hypnotherapist, biofeedback practitioner, and organic beauty expert. And you know, ladies and gents, I'm going to be talking about something today that I have struggled with nearly all of my life. Now, there's two areas that I want to talk about as far as the struggle. One is what so many women and men struggle with, which is sleep. I have had an issue with not only getting to be tired at night and trying to fall asleep, but just having that busy mind and turning that mind chatter off. I'm sure you can relate. And the other aspect is hitting midlife and coming around full circle to re-identify with the fact that I have ADHD. Now, I did not say I am an ADHD woman because I am Cassandra and I don't love labels, but I definitely have an interest-braced brain. And so what I found, whether behind the chair with so many conversations and from my coaching program and just being around other women, there's something I wanted to share. And if you feel like you have a scattered brain or you were forgetting things often, or you simply hit midlife and you feel like you've hit a wall and you're exhausted and tired and you're losing everything and everything just feels like a mess. And you go to the doctor and they say you have anxiety or depression. And so you get an SSRI. I'm here to say that there are 4 times more women being diagnosed with ADHD than there are children today. So that tells us that we have an executive function situation going on that is really becoming an epidemic. And my belief is that many of us suffer from sleep, and it could be undiagnosed, or you may have some form of spectrum of a neurodiverse mind. And we're going to dive into that today. So with that being said, I'm really taking a shift on not only the podcast, but the women that I have an absolute passion and my mission to help women with executive function that feel completely on overdrive, completely impassioned to bring their gifts to the world, but often feel like they have imposter syndrome. They aren't like everybody else. They can't get things done. And it affects the stress on our body and it affects our sleep at night. But there's more to how stress affects our sleep, but it also has to do with all of the intricacies biologically with someone with a neurodiverse mind or ADHD. So I'll be digging into the science and research, but to keep this simple for practical use, there's a fairly simple screening question that you can ask yourself. So go ahead and just go in your mind's eye right now. And the question is, do you have trouble getting to sleep or getting to bed? And many of us have just that one more thing syndrome by getting into the next thing. And it turns out that we have time blindness. And 2 hours later, you find yourself watching YouTube or impulsively cleaning because all the kids have gone to bed, or scrolling on social media. Now, it raises the question, is it nature versus nurture with sleep and ADHD? And when I say ADHD, there is a wide spectrum. And in fact, my dear friend Ned Hallowell calls it vast. And we're reinventing behind ADHD because most women aren't hyperactive. And so going into this a little bit deeper, sleep disorders are a bright line factor in the quality of life within the neurodiverse mind and the spectrum thereof. And so today I'll be focusing on specifically ADHD and how it affects our sleep. So did you know that up to 50 to 70% of ADHD women experience sleep problems, ranging from insomnia to secondary sleep conditions? So let's start with the starting connection between ADHD and sleep. Beginning around puberty, people with ADHD are more likely to experience shorter sleep time. They also experience problems falling asleep and staying asleep. From there, one's environment, emotional regulation acumen, and stress affects the brain, of course. But on top of this, the sleep problem in ADHD tend to increase as we age. Lucky us, right? So is it just an issue of hyperactivity? And indeed, it's not. Even those who are rarely hyperactive, especially women, they often find themselves in the EDD category, are rarely hyperactive during the day, and they may experience the racing thoughts and a burst of energy at night that interferes with their sleep. So if sleep disorders, sleep hormone dysregulation, and stress are left unattended over time, insomnia is going to worsen and start to develop feelings of stress-related anxiety around bedtime, which just makes it even worse. So sleep problems in ADHD appear to differ depending on the type of ADHD. Now, there's two types. The first is inattentive, which are symptoms are more likely to have a later bedtime. And then there's hyperactive. Impulse symptoms are more likely to suffer from insomnia. Those with combined hyperactive, impulsive, and inattentive, which would equate to ADHD, experience both poor sleep quality and later bedtimes. So ADHD has mimetic symptoms, and they can actually be a mirror to sleep deprivation, which is also to be very mindful of. And adult ADHD sleep problems include forgetfulness and difficulty concentrating. And in children, fatigue may present as being hyperactive and impulsive, wired and tired, if that makes sense, if you understand functional medicine principles. So sometimes it can be difficult, really, really difficult to tell whether these issues are brought on by the ADHD or the lack of sleep. And this may lead to misdiagnoses or may allow sleep disorders to go completely undetected. So let's look at the biology link behind ADHD and sleep. Now, ADHD sleep problems may be a side effect of impaired arousal, alertness, and regulation circuitry within the brain. And researchers believe that ADHD sleep problems can be traced to a delayed circadian rhythm with a later onset of melatonin production. So usually your melatonin starts to go up and down, just like your cortisol levels. And so there's a delayed response in that melatonin production, which makes you tired. And then let's talk about real briefly about medications. Now, some individuals find it easier to sleep with calming effects of a stimulant medication that are commonly prescribed to people with ADHD. And that's why a lot of people that have ADHD can drink coffee at night, and it actually helps them go to sleep. However, for many people, stimulant medications cause a number of sleep problems in and of themselves. So these coexisting disorders such as anxiety and depression, or even substance abuse, as well as poor sleep hygiene, is likely to play a role in further sleep issues. So how does ADHD sleep issues affect our everyday life? Though there is little research on this subject of ADHD with accompanying sleep disorders, children and adults with ADHD plus a sleep disorder often report more severe ADHD symptoms and an absolute lower quality of life. And to couple this, they suffer from depression, hyperactivity, inattentiveness goes up, and also the difficulty of processing information, and oftentimes a higher BMI. So over the long term, that chronic sleep deprivation leaves us very vulnerable to physical health issues. So not sleeping well at night can also cause daytime fatigue. And these individuals with ADHD-related sleep deprivation, they are just absolutely fucking cranky. They're grumpy, they're irritable, they're restless, you're tired. May have problem with, paying attention at school or at work. And a lot of times this can then follow over into a mood disorder, right? So the summation of this research shows that sleep and ADHD complexities resolve in being more prone to depression, to anxiety, stress. And probably you're showing up late for work and events in your life. So I want to say something around being really, really aware and beware, because ADHD symptoms often resemble the symptoms of these sleep disorders, underlying sleep disorders that actually go undiagnosed. So we're going to talk a little bit about those things like restless leg syndrome and other nuances. But let's just talk about the big four ADHD sleep problems, right? So the first is difficult falling asleep, as we've already referenced. About 3/4 of adults with ADHD report inability to turn off the mind, to fall asleep at night. And many describe themselves as night owls who get that burst of energy when the sun goes down. And others report that they feel tired through the day, but as soon as they hit the head on the pillow, the mind starts to chatter. Their thoughts jump or bounce from worrying about one thing to another. And unfortunately, many of these adults describe their thoughts as absolutely racing, prompting for a misdiagnosis of a mood disorder, when this is nothing more than the mental relentlessness of a neurodiverse mind. More than 70% of adults with ADHD report that they spend more than 1 hour trying to fall asleep at night. Now, the second is restless sleep. And when individuals with ADHD finally fall asleep, their sleep is restless. They toss, they turn, they awaken at any noise in the house. I know for myself, I have to have fans on, and I also play thunder and lightning and rain sound from another room to kind of dim out that into the background. I create layers of sounds to nullify everything. And they are so fitful that bed partners often choose to sleep in another bed. And they often awake to find their bed torn apart, covers kicked on the floor. Sleep is not refreshing for them, and they just wake up tired. Now, the third is difficulty waking up with ADHD. Now, more than 80% of adults with ADHD, and in many research and psychological studies, report multiple awakenings until about 4 a.m. Then they finally fall asleep, and they call it like the sleeping dead, right? From which they have extreme difficulty getting up in the morning. They sleep through 2-3 alarms, as well as all attempt of the family members trying to get them out of bed or to school or to work or what have you. And they're commonly irritable, even combative when roused before they are ready. And many of them say they are not fully alert until probably about noon or 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Now, the fourth is intrusive sleep with ADHD. Now, Paul Wender, who's an MD, a 30-year veteran ADHD researcher, relates ADHD to interest-based performance. And as long as a person with ADHD was interested in or challenged by what they were doing, they did not demonstrate symptoms of the disorder. The phenomenon is called hyperfocus by some, and often considered to be an ADHD pattern. Now, I can absolutely relate to this. I can focus on things that I'm interested in. If, on the other hand, an individual with ADHD loses interest in the activity, the nervous system glitches, it disengages in search of something more interesting. So sometimes this disengagement is so abrupt as to induce sudden extreme drowsiness, even to the point of falling asleep. EEG findings in ADHD reports that the brainwave tracings at this time show a sudden intrusion of theta waves into the alpha and beta rhythms of alertness. So one hypothesis is that the lack of accurate circadian rhythm clock biorhythms may also account for difficulty than many with ADHD have in judging the passage of time. So this internal clock is just not set, which ensues what we call time blindness, where neurodiverse individuals experience only two times, now and not now. And many of my adult friends and women that I coach, they don't even, they got their watches on, but they don't even pay attention to their watches. They experience time as an abstract concept, important to other people, but one which they do not care and they don't understand. It will take many more studies to establish the link between the circadian rhythms and ADHD, but this time blindness and no concept of time is definitely a part of this varying degree of sleep disorders. So then there's sleep disorder breathing. Now, sleep disorder breathing, which is called SDB, including snoring and sleep apnea, affects about 1/3 of patients with ADHD. And this disorder leads to disturbed sleep and daytime sleepiness. And many of these individuals may turn to the need for stimulants. And a tip for this is that studies suggest that removing the tonsils may actually help ADHD and sleep apnea symptoms in children, while CPAP for adults also work as well. Then there's restless leg syndrome. And one of my past CERT instructors had this, and I just felt so bad for her. It was so frustrating. And, people with restless leg syndrome are plagued by tingling sensations in the legs that make it really hard to fall asleep. And RLS or other types of periodic limb movement disorders may occur in, actually, listen to this, 50% of people with ADHD. And children with ADHD and RLS appear to spend longer in stages of that light sleep because they can't get that deep sleep. So researchers believe that restless leg syndrome is caused by iron and dopamine deficiencies, which are basically implicated in ADHD. So restless leg syndrome can actually be treated with iron supplements and dopaminergic agents. And then there's the last one, which is narcolepsy. And individuals with narcolepsy tend to fall asleep suddenly during the day and may have difficulty sleeping at night. So it's really important to pay attention to this, obviously, with driving, how you work, where you work. And it's also possible that both disorders might stem from similar cause, such as faulty gene or problem of neurotransmitters. So narcolepsy is usually treated with medication and obviously professional support. So in summary, adults with ADHD rarely fall asleep easily, sleep soundly through the night, and then they wake up feeling non-refreshed. And most often, ADHD's mental and physical restlessness disturbs a person's sleep patterns and is the ensuing exhaustion that hurts our overall health and the confusion of how to get treatment. And we're only starting to understand the stronger link between ADHD and sleep that creates the falling asleep, the staying asleep, and the waking up refresh. So to get support for sleep, I'll go into a little bit more in a future podcast, but I wanted to just go ahead and give this reference to the absolute link between that chatter mind of yours may be a part of the vast and the ADHD sink in women, especially as they age and they lose their estrogen, which then depletes their dopamine, and which furthers the sleep issues even more. And no matter how a doctor explains sleep problems, the remedy usually involves something called sleep hygiene. And it's to consider turning off the blue lights, turning down the noise, needing white noise to bring in, such for a radio or a fan. And to use the bed only for sleep or sex, not a place to confront problems or read or argue, and having a set bedtime and avoiding naps during the day. And a couple fabulous supplements I would recommend that are safe and most people can try is melatonin. and it naturally occurs in the peptide release of the brain in response to setting up the sun, has some function setting that circadian clock back in order. And you can get it at most health food stores. Melatonin is known to boost mood, slow cancer, and also strengthen your immunity and longevity, which is great. I love GABA, which supports neurotransmitters to slow down and calm the nervous system and the mind, as well as magnesium, which calms the body and the nervous system and the limbs and allows better communication for the body at the cellular level. And then last is meditation. Meditation as the sleep molecule. You know, since the beginning of time, Earth's natural cycles of light and dark have dictated our biological clock. And we're now learning that this hyper-productive society, we're all sleeping shorter and shorter and disturbed sleep. So rebalancing the biology with meditation absolutely has science and brings in the quality of our mind and our body and emotional regulation. So if you often find yourself starting at your alarm clock when you should be staring at your eyelids, then you likely have beta brain wave excess, best known as the dominant mental state, where we're anxious, stressed, or depressed. So it comes down to mastering your mind so you can literally sleep like a log. So conscious questions such as, why am I so well able to fall asleep at night? Why is it okay not to know everything? Why is it fun not to understand everything? Why am I imperfectly perfect? Why is it good to just be me? Why is it wonderful to be me? Why am I so lovable? Why am I safe and secure? And so meditation, supplements, and just the insight of that undiagnosed sleep disorders for so much of your life may be related to ADHD, neurodiversity, or not. But it's worth an honest question. And I hope that some of these direct correlations back to the 4 top reasons we have sleep problems, such as difficult falling asleep, staying asleep, restless leg syndrome, and how our biorhythms literally are delayed in the neurodiverse mind, and how supplements and mindfulness allow us to come back to ourselves and turn off the outer world. So I hope you enjoyed this short podcast. If you have any questions or want to reach out, I love helping Uber-driven women that may suspect or be diagnosed with ADHD really come back with a emotional regulatory and energetic ways and a metaphysical way of mindfulness, coming back to self, versus throwing a bunch of planners and timers and all of these things that force us into part of the brain where we're not very strong in, but allowing us to lean into that empathy and that intuition and that essence of who we are to calm our nervous system. So with that said, thank you so much for listening to the Awaken Beauty podcast. This is Cassandra, and until next time, stay sane, get sleep, and bring your sexy back. Well, hello, Awaken Beauty. Thank you so much for joining the show today. Were you inspired? Please leave a comment or your own personal aha moment so others can capture exactly what you did. Also, please like and subscribe wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. And if you're interested in high quality natural products for your hair, skin, and wellness, including organic CBD, please visit evoquebeauty.com. Again, that is evoquebeauty.com, evoquebeauty.com. And until next time, darling, stay sane, get sleep, and bring your sexy back.